All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Making Monsters. We're continuing on this offseason. We've talked a ton about all the quarterbacks the Bears could potentially take, but we officially had that trade recently where Justin Fields is now a Pittsburgh Steeler, and now the Bears are looking at what they should do in the draft. So a lot of things to talk about. The Caleb versus Justin war, I guess, can finally be over until it gets to the season and one of them's playing well and one's not, or vice, whatever it may be. But let's continue on with some of the stuff. I want to talk today. We are joined by Brad Speilberger of PFF. He is the salary cap analyst for PFF, but does a lot of draft talk. So a ton of stuff to talk to you about, Brad. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Let's go ahead and talk about some of the moves that have been made this offseason before we get to the draft. Ryan Poles, I'm a big Ryan Poles fan. I think that he's turned this roster completely around. He's done it in being able to get the cap management back to a place where it's manageable, which it wasn't for several years. And one of the things this offseason, I think a big move that a lot of people were shouting for anyways, is Jaylen Johnson. And I think for me, Brad, win-win on each side, but what were your thoughts on that when it comes to the contract for them and what it looks like for Jaylen and the Bears in the future and that secondary?
Yeah, Ryan Poles and Matt Feinstein, who handles the contract, have done a great job. And I think the Jaylen deal is a great example. This is a guy that is currently 24 years old, coming off a Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber season. And yes, it's a strong deal for the player, no question. He gets a 4-year deal. A lot of top corner contracts have been 5 years, and these guys want to get back to the market, especially the younger ones, as fast as possible. But, $19 million per year, you can look at that, stack it up at the top of the market. Obviously it's not. You have Jair Alexander at 21, but also all the other metrics, cash flows, guarantees, things like that. It's a fringe top 5 corner contract. And then also you have to appreciate the inflation of the salary cap, right? I mean, this is a very, very strong deal for the Bears in the current context. I'm sure Jaylen Johnson was trying to become the highest paid corner in the NFL. And frankly, there was an argument and a case to be made he should have been. So I think the Bears did very well here. They lock up an important piece of this defense, Bears, draft and develop type guy. I saw Cole Kmet on CHGO mention it's him, Jaylen, Patrick Scales, and Cairo Santos are the only guys that are still in the roster. So I think it's very, very important to get that done. I think it's a win for both parties, and it's just great to see it finally get done.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that what is your reasoning? Do you think that some of these teams, is it just a placeholder when they do tag these guys initially and they just maybe need a few more days to lock in some details of the contract?
Yeah, my understanding was this deal was really, really close, and they almost did avoid a franchise tag, which, obviously in hindsight, we know that because it only took, like you said, a couple days to then get it done. Yeah, you're working through it. There are so many details and fine print to work through. I think, again, I obviously come on these shows and talk about the high level numbers, but there's so much language and legal, jargon that goes into all these things. So I'm sure it was in a good place. They just knew they needed to buy themselves a little bit more time. We're not comfortable letting Jaylen hit the market, which was smart. I think he would have gotten a massive deal elsewhere. And then it was good to see, though, no drawn out battle and back and forth. Just a couple days, smooth it over, get it done.
Yeah, and I know especially since there wasn't anybody else that the Bears wanted to tag. That's some situations in other teams. Jacksonville, for example, used the tag and then weren't able to tag Calvin Ridley, ultimately ended up losing Calvin Ridley. The Bears weren't in that situation, so it ended up being okay. Let's move to one of the moves that maybe some people weren't too happy about. I personally did like this move, especially if this person can stay healthy. DeAndre Swift, what are your thoughts on that when it comes to what they did pay him and what he could possibly do in the running back room?
Yeah, really good young player, a guy that can be a pass-catching option, a good check-down outlet for Caleb Williams, a guy that can make players miss an open space, as shifty as they come at the running back spot. And obviously now you have a 3-headed monster potentially with him, Khalil Herbert, and Roschon Johnson. You have a new offensive coordinator in Shane Waldron that used second-round picks in back-to-back draft classes on running backs, in Seattle with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet last year. So they want to have a good stable. They want to have different skill sets, and I think they do. The contract, I think, aged pretty well. The issue was it was the first contract that got done in all of free agency across the entire NFL. And look, it is a strong deal, but then we also saw the running backs had a good offseason, which is great for them. It's good at that position that has struggled recently. So, 3 years, $24 million, about $15 million guaranteed. It is a good deal, top 10 deal at the position. But you then saw the Saquon Barkley, the Josh Jacobs, a guy like Tony Pollard gets similar money. And I think Swift is probably a more dynamic player. So I think it's a good deal. I think it was more the frustration of the timing and not addressing other spots first. But in a vacuum, I think it is a good deal for a good player.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they really work with that, because one of the things with Shane Waldron, when he had Kenneth Gainwell, that was pretty much his only running back weapon he was using, and now he has 3 different running back options to use, and that are all different kind of backs too. So it'll be fun to watch that. In addition, when you talk to Lions fans and Philly fans, their feelings towards DeAndre Swift are completely different too, for the most part. So we'll see which side of that we get. The next one I think was something Ryan Poles talked about a ton, and which direction he wanted to go. He said after Eddie Jackson, it was time for Eddie to go. I think we all kind of felt that was coming. They knew that he probably would have had to pay Eddie a decent amount. He mentioned he wanted a little less contract on that, a little less money, and he said he wanted a veteran guy, and he went and got Kevin Byer. What are your thoughts on that? And in general, that addition to the safeties?
Yeah, another guy from Philly who spent had a short stop in Philadelphia with the Eagles last year, even shorter than Swift. Look, I think Byer is still one of the better free safeties in the NFL. Yes, he's an older player. Again, I understand how that deal gets done before free agency because he was cut. 2 years, $15 million in a very loaded safety market is a strong contract. There's no question about that. There are other good young players that signed lesser deals, but he has been one of the rangiest ball hawk type safeties in the NFL. Even last year when he goes to Philadelphia, yeah, there were some warts, there were some issues, but that entire secondary was kind of a disaster down the stretch for them. We all saw how the second half of their season went. So I think it is important to get a veteran, a leader in that room, because we're talking about Jaylen. I mean, Jaylen's the elder statesman outside of Kevin Byard. So I think it'll age well. If that defensive front can get pressure, you're going to see Kevin Byard turn the ball over, get some interceptions, some pass deflections. It's a good veteran player.
Brad, which I think that's what we like to hear. We saw that the defense looked like they started to transform a bit later in the season, and a lot of that were the interceptions they were able to get, which was huge. So to add on another player who's able to do that, and 3 of the things that I read that he's better at, which, look, I loved Eddie. I rooted for Eddie, but Kevin has been better when it comes to against and coverage. He's been better when it comes to his lower missed tackle rate and against the run. So those are some of the things that in moments we saw Eddie struggle with too. So to get a veteran guy and come in, aside Jaquan Brisker, who most of us are big fans of, and it has continued to progress each year, I think it's a good move. Now I think the big ones that maybe most people were excited about, obviously Keenan Allen, but they also got Gerald Everett from the Chargers too. The Chargers have lost their entire offense pretty much, aside from Justin Herbert. But I think a big win for the Bears. What are your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, the Everett deal I love, has obviously the connections to Shane Waldron as well. He coached him in Seattle and with the LA Rams. And he's a guy that, again, up there in age, but 2-year, $12 million, a very good deal in the tight end market. He can still make players miss in open space. He actually has the second most forced missed tackles over the last 2 years, behind only Travis Kelce among tight ends. So he's a guy that can make the first defender miss just shaking him, can also lower his shoulder and run some dudes over. And when you watch their tape the last couple of years, Justin Herbert is looking his way on third downs. He's looking his way in the red zone. He clearly had a lot of trust and confidence in Gerald Everett. So I love that move. And of course, how can you not love adding, a legend in Keenan Allen? Again, they got to work through the contract there. 1 year, $23 million, probably not the greatest investment, but I'm confident they're working through, just like Montez Sweat. We all panicked. And then a couple hours later, an extension was done. So I'm sure they're working through that. They have the 9th overall pick. Maybe that changes things a little bit if they do get a receiver. But regardless, you're now building out this infrastructure for that quarterback at number 1 overall. He has DJ Moore and Keenan Allen to work with. Doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, I think when you look at the stat that from last year, the last receiver other than DJ Moore to have a touchdown was in week 2, and that was Chase Claypool. So that is definitely to have another receiving weapon. Obviously, Cole Kmet was a big part of that offense too, but when you have another receiver, obviously it helps. And you just mentioned when it comes to that future contract, Ryan Poles just at in his presser this week at the meetings, kind of in a way, I can't remember the exact words, but was pretty much like when he makes these moves, he also is already thinking about the future too. And that kind of, to me, signaled also back to Montez Sweat. Everyone freaked out a little bit. And I think he was already, at the moment he made that trade, was already trying to figure something out when it comes to beyond that half a season and now 1 season for Keenan. So it'll be fun to see that. I think one of the biggest things that a lot of people are looking at this offseason, and now probably still heading into the draft, because a lot of people aren't super confident, but that interior offensive line needed a ton of help, especially the center position. We saw just a rotating group of guys go in and out. injury, but we saw Cody Whitehair get benched. We saw snaps going over Justin's head and between his legs, and a lot of bad in that inside. And so he made a few moves: Ryan Bates, Coleman Shelton, Matt Pryor. What are your thoughts on some of those? Are you expecting Coleman to be the starter and Bates to kind of be a swing guy? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so look, this obviously in Ryan Bates is a player they've liked for a very long time. We all remember they signed him to that offer sheet when he was a restricted free agent. The Bills, of course, stepped up and matched it. And then, they had a lot of pieces on the interior. They used their second round pick last year on a guard who came in and played well for them. So became available again. The Bills were obviously shedding salaries across their entire roster. It sounds like Bates probably does have the lead track right now to be the starter at center. But I think it's going to be a legitimate camp battle. I think him and Coleman Shelton again, a guy who played a couple years ago with the Rams with Shane Waldron. The beauty there is he's also played a full season starting at right guard. He's played some left guard too. So both guys, you're getting one that will be the starter. And the other guy is a legitimate swing backup option that can play all three interior spots at a pretty high level. Like that is, you're building out depth as well, which is super, super important and great to see. I like both moves, the low cost additions, because we saw that the guard market kind of explode, and two just good, smart players that I think will be good for Caleb Williams or whoever, going forward.
Yeah, and I think when we look at especially these last two seasons, I mentioned the revolving door of the interior, but the line in general, I mean, I think there was only 2 or 3 games last season where the starting line, what was supposed to be the starting line, played together. So it's definitely something that needed to be fixed in general, but also that the depth side of things. Let's take a look at the Bears draft. What would you put as the biggest positional need right now heading into the draft, outside of quarterback, obviously?
Yeah, I would still go receiver. If one of, Malik Neighbors out of LSU or Roma Dunze out of Washington is available, I don't think Marvin Harrison is going to be there at 9. But obviously, if he is, you make that the fastest draft pick in NFL history. But, I think, yes, I love Keenan Allen. But again, even if they do extend him, I think you want to bring in a young weapon on a cheap rookie deal, because then even if, let's say Keenan and DJ, it works out for both. They play a bunch of years. They're still both expensive. And you have no kind of cheap, awesome player that is a pass catcher at receiver. So I still think that is the number one priority. I would understand if fans want an edge rusher, maybe even like a Byron Murphy, maybe even a tackle. I am a Braxton Jones guy. I think he is a good player and can continue to get better. And we've seen growth and improvement from him. So for me, it's wide receiver.
So if these guys, I may answer it because you said wide receiver at 9, if all of these players are sitting there at 9, which the chances of this are rare. Joe Alt, Adunze, Turner, and Verse, which one of those would you take at 9?
Yeah, so for me it is Adunze, but look, I could see a scenario where the former offensive lineman and Ryan Poles, falls in love with one of these offensive linemen, and look, I wouldn't dislike the pick, right? That's the beauty of it too. They have optionality. You mentioned the lack of picks. I could see a trade down as well, and you still maybe get a tackle or a receiver or a pass rusher that you like. I would go Adunze, like I said, but I'm not going to be frustrated if they take a blue chip tackle, at 9th overall. Get 2 bookends, for hopefully years to come for Caleb Williams. I do like Braxton Jones a lot, but, again, it just maybe you have the best swing tackle in the NFL, or maybe you trade him elsewhere, get some more capital. They can work through all that. But the beauty is they really do have options. They can kind of go best player available at every pick, besides number 1. I guess that is the best player available. But you know what I mean? Like, they really they're not forced into any decision.
Yeah. So thoughts on Caleb, because I think that's the big thing. And the majority of people that I've talked to are very high on Caleb. And this goes to scouts and analysts and coaches. You have your few people now who are kind of going in and being like, hey, Jayden Daniels could be the guy. But what I'm guessing you think Caleb is that number 1 pick. And if so, what do you like about Caleb Williams?
I think he's the best prospect in the class by a good margin, frankly.
Okay.
I like Drake May. I like Jayden Daniels. I actually don't even mind J.J. McCarthy compared to others, but none of them I think are in the same boat right now as Caleb Williams. I think he has the best arm talent in the draft by a good bit. I think you see him, the game moves slow for him. He can kind of like see the whole field and has a good feel for what he's doing. And you hear a lot of the stuff. Yes, he needs to drop his sack rate down a little bit, do some things to get rid of the football. But if you break that down by down and distance or by the score, you add the context to why that's happening. Very quickly, you see that he doesn't always run into those issues. It was, his defense at USC was allowing 50 points a game, and he was trying to be a superhero. So, you got to work on that. It's still a problem that you have to work through, but I think he's a special talent. I think he has the potential to be one of the best quarterbacks in this league.
Yeah, I agree. I've had to accept Justin moving on. I was very pro keep Justin, but I was never anti Caleb. I was just more so like I like Justin Fields. I would like to give him another chance, but I trust Ryan Poles, and if he thinks it's time to make that, kind of reset that quarterback clock again, I get it. And I've slowly gotten on the acceptance train, so I'm there. And the more I watch, the more you understand. And like you said, there's a few things that are, I think, more so triggering, not scary, just because a lot of the issues are things we kind of saw in Justin. And like you said, fumbled 30 plus times, and the time to throw, all of those things that kind of started popping up of Caleb Williams are ones where I felt like it was same issues we were already dealing with. But I think a few things we have to acknowledge is that Justin's had 3 years in the NFL, and it's still, some of these issues kind of lingered through those 3 years. And now there's also a much better team that Caleb could be going into with a new offensive coordinator, and to kind of start fresh was probably the best choice for Ryan Poles and the Bears. But speaking of Ryan Poles, he made a comment today. He was on Pat McAfee. I don't know if you saw this already, but he asked him about RG3's comments on him saying he should pull an Eli and not go to the Bears. It was this big thing, weird thing for RG3 to say. To me, it was a little odd because he has been pretty pro, like, maybe it's because he liked Justin so much. I don't know. But so Ryan Poles kind of made comments about, like, we're trying to break this cycle here, and it kind of pisses me off, was his words about it. So what are your thoughts on that, of RG3 saying that and Ryan Poles kind of sticking up of what they're doing in Chicago right now?
Yeah, maybe RG3 is trying to help out his former team in Washington. I don't know why he would have any allegiances to a team that ruined his career pretty quickly, or why he would argue they're any better of an infrastructure. I'm being facetious. I like what they're doing as well. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's nonsense. Like, not to attack another person, RG3 is the new take artist in sports media. That's just where we're at. He probably doesn't believe half of what he's saying. You got to respect it. It gets clicks, it gets anger, it gets brought up on Pat McAfee. So yeah, I think nothing of it. Look, I mean, I think it is legitimate to think that a caliber of player like a Caleb Williams, who we've known is going to be a top 5 pick for multiple years now, should be able to ask questions and want a better infrastructure in place and be, I know some fans push back on that and are afraid of the kind of the new age of athlete and whatever, but that's where we're at. And you have to adapt and be realistic with where we're at. But that's why you trade for a Keenan Allen. That's why you make the moves you make, get 2 centers. You mentioned Matt Pryor, a solid swing tackle, et cetera, to ease the concern there and make them feel wanted and comfortable and appreciated. I have no doubt that both parties are ignoring 99% of the noise. Everything that I've heard, by the way, personally, and now we're hearing it from the Bears themselves, but I never heard any of the bad stuff about Caleb Williams the entire time it was getting spouted off by national and local people. I never heard anything to that effect, and it sounds like that is now, rightfully so, coming out on a larger scale.
Yeah, the only thing that I heard at all was more so his dad, like his dad kind of vocalizing some things, and maybe people were scared he was going to have like a Lonzo Ball-esque Ball brothers dad. But I feel like I haven't even seen anything from that. When we were at the pro day, the dad was there. You see Ryan Poles walking up and shaking hands. I feel like someone who had that issue with sidelines in everyone's ear, like saying something at that point. Brad, let's talk about some of the contracts that may be coming up, because we talked about how much, the dead cap that Ryan Poles has been able to eliminate this last few years. Some of the contracts he's got, Cole Kmet, Jaylen Johnson. Before that, I can't even remember the last second contract anybody got in Chicago. It doesn't happen often, between bad drafts and between letting good players go. So what are there some guys coming up this next season? Justin Fields would have been one, and he's gone now. So who else are you looking at that the Bears need to start thinking about contracts for?
Yeah, so like you said, it was Cole Kmet last offseason, then Jaylen this season. I really don't think there are many obvious candidates. I know fans love Tevin Jenkins, and when he's out there and a true road grader and mowing people over in the open field, I love him too. But I don't think you try to early extend a guy that you just really want to see if he can stay out there. And we're talking about bringing in 2 guys that are swing guards. It's not an accident that they're spending to ensure they have a backup option in place, hypothetically, for the left guard spot. So that's not to pick on Tevin or to say he's not worthy. He's a phenomenal football player. We've all seen it. But And that just strikes me as a spot where you say, stay healthy for 2024, and we will gladly work on something, whether it's the middle of the year, like a Jaylen Johnson example again,
Yeah.
or kind of take our time. Now, the other one that I find interesting is the DJ Moore situation, right?
Mhm.
You obviously still have 2 years left in that deal. You trade for him right after he gets extended. He was phenomenal last season. There's no doubt about that. He's still fairly young. I have no doubt he's going to be a phenomenal receiver for a long time here. And I know the market's about to explode. We're going to get multiple 30 plus million per year wide receivers. I totally get all that. So if they do go that route, I think it would make plenty of sense. I feel like they might not want to set a precedent of extending a guy with 2 years remaining on his contract.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm wrong. That's just kind of my read on the situation. Let him play another season, then going into a contract year, you work through it. Look, if he balls out again and the market's higher and you pay him a higher price, that's a great problem to have, right? You know, you want to do early extensions a lot. I talk about it ad nauseum.
Yeah.
But anyway, like, you know, you also sometimes don't want to give a third contract before you have to. So either way, I think it's fine with me. Those are really the only ones that I see. I think their business internally was Jaylen, and they got that done.
Yeah, because I think when you look a little beyond that, you'll have the draft class of which is a positive thing, but potentially Kyler, Jaquan, and Braxton, depending what happens in the next few years. So I think if he does want to make any of those early contracts, just if those three guys are in your future, then maybe that's something he's kind of considering. But other than that, yeah. And I'm the biggest Tevin fan in the world. I love Tevin Jenkins, and I'm very vocal about that. He's probably one of my favorite Bears right now. I just love, he has that like Bear mentality to me, you know, like kind of rough and mean and defends the quarterback on the field, but then like just goofy once he steps off. He reminds me of Akeem Hicks in a way, you know, like that like smiley, fun guy, but then just flips a switch when he's on the field. But I get it. You got to be on there. And if you're not on the field, there's only so much you can do. And you saw the moment he would leave during the Browns game last season, he got the concussion, and it was like the offensive line immediately just fell apart as soon as Tevin steps off the field. And that's just something you can't have throughout the season every single year. So that was honestly one of the questions I was going to ask about Tevin. But I think that if he stays healthy this season, then it definitely is probably something they'll talk about. I want to switch over to the NFL in general. One of the things, obviously, the coaches' meetings were this week. One of the things that have come out that's a big thing is this new kickoff rule, which is very interesting. I know it comes from the XFL. It seems like they're just trying to revive some of the excitement in kickoffs. And in addition to player safety, that's their big thing. It's going to be intriguing to me to watch them do this. But how do you think this could possibly affect them building special teams now? Because it almost seems like you'd want to have like super athletic kickers because no one can move beside him and the returner until the ball hits hands or the ground.
Yeah, so this is awesome. You got to shout out Sam Schwartzstein, who invented this for the XFL. I know there's some minor tweaks the NFL made. They're not giving him enough credit. They basically stole his rule, and they won't say his name. But he's the best, and he works at Amazon now on Thursday nights. It's great. It's a phenomenal development for the league. It is going to make kickoffs more exciting while still working to reduce injuries. So, you know, we had so few non-touchbacks last year, and obviously we're getting ready to root for the Hall of Fame game with Devin Hester, and what he was great at isn't even part of the sport anymore. And so It's obviously different, and it's going to look different. But I think it's honestly a great opportunity for Bisa Jones, who has already been a very good returner. I know he's had some fumbles and whatnot, but when he does get his hands on the football, he was third last year in the average kick return. And in this format where everyone, like you said, can't start running until he gets the ball, I think it's great for him too. He's very good accelerating. He has good lateral movement ability. I think it's a huge opportunity for him. I know Ryan Poles still believes in him, has faith in him. He's said that before. It's been tough. There's been some issues, and maybe he doesn't live up to the third round draft status and all that as a big part of the offense, but he can be a weapon on special teams, and I think he's going to be excited to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you look at the issues, I think they were all punts too, returns that he's fumbled everything on, but he muffed quite a few, and that was people's concern. But when it comes to the kickoff, those guys aren't running at you until you touch the ball anyways, and that's where that one error is. So maybe that does get him back in his comfort zone when it comes to it and let him go, use his speed a little bit. And I know last year you could tell they have some confidence and they want him on the team because even last year they started using him as running back in certain times later in the season. They definitely wanted to get him on the field as much as they could. And I know a lot of people were shouting about it, but you used a pretty high pick on Bayless. And I think that Ryan Poles wants to see something play out with Bayless Jones. So I agree. I think it will be interesting to watch him. I know that the back and forth between players on Twitter has been interesting, because I think that not with this rule, I guess a little bit, it seems like most people are positive on this, but the hip drop tackle, it seems like defensive players are very upset. Offensive players, guys like Kyle Long, have been like, hey, this is great. This is going to be, help a lot when it comes to the safety stuff and all of that. What are your thoughts on that new rule?
Yeah, look, I think it is at its core like a good idea and is beneficial for player safety. And we've seen those, lower leg ligament injuries that occur as a result of some of these tackles. I have no issue with that. And, I work with some rugby stands like Sam Monson over here at PFF, who says all these NFL players are whining, but they need to get better at tackling. My concern is we're once again putting something in the hands of the officials and referees to get right that is very subjective. And they put out a video of some examples of, good tackles and bad tackles. To me, they were indistinguishable. To me, the bad ones, the player landed on the other player's leg, but not intentionally so. They did obviously, swing their weight and all those things, but it's just tough too, because like, for example, I'm very happy there's no longer head-to-head contact, but I feel like they're not appreciating the downstream effect of what they do. So when you take away guys launching in head-to-head contact, good. But then guys are diving at knees and diving at like that's going to happen. And so I'm not saying don't take away the first just because the second happens. But my thing is, there's just like, it's becoming so hard to play defense and make a tackle. And I think the hip drop is because you can't drive into an offensive player anymore, because you might get, targeting or if you land on the guy, the body weight, all those things. So I like I get what Kyle Long's saying. I hope it does lead to fewer injuries. And that's obviously always paramount. I'm just worried about, it's late in the game and it's a one-score game, and some call comes in and we're all arguing about it on Twitter.
Yeah, because it's not a little penalty. I think it's 15 yards automatic first down. Like that's huge. That's big game changer call. And one thing that's interesting to me too is because, like you said, the guys are just saying, that's what even Kyle and a lot of the guys that are pro this move and for the safety, like you said, you get it. You don't want guys getting hurt. But a lot of their reasoning is, when it comes to that safety side, is their comment, hey, learn to tackle better. But it's interesting to me when you have a league that has taken away, like, practices, you can barely hit each other. Preseason, you can barely hit each other. Hardly, your starters hardly play. But now you want them to go deeper into all of the tiny little bits of how they tackle, but they can't tackle until game day.
It's tough. Yeah, no, it's very, very tough. And you got to I think you see early in the year, like, tackling mechanics are not as clean as they are later in the season. And again, the design there was to reduce injuries in meaningless football games. Fantastic. But there's always going to be, extra effects that happen as a result.
Yes. All right. A few more for you before you go, Brad. Well, this is kind of one just speed round a little bit, because we're talking about the draft order. Draft day, I love. It's exciting. It's fun. Last year was wild. There was a ton of trades when it comes to the top. This year, Bears, Washington, Patriots, Cardinals, Chargers, Giants, Titans, Falcons, Bears, Jets, Vikings, Broncos are the top of that. A lot of these teams need quarterbacks. You see some mock drafts where it has 4 quarterbacks and 4 wide receivers going in the top 10, which is just wild to think about. But what are your expectations when it comes to that top? Are you expecting all 4 of those quarterbacks to go in the top? Are you expecting a lot of trades? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we'll get 4 quarterbacks in the top 6 picks, no question. I do think one of those will be the Minnesota Vikings moving up to get a quarterback at the 4, 5, 6 range. In a trade up with, Arizona, Los Angeles, or maybe the Giants. And then I do think we're going to get Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors very, very early. Maybe one of Neighbors or Odunze makes it to 9, just because 4 quarterbacks, you got to assume, a Joe Alt type player is going to go. Everyone thinks Tennessee, which makes a lot of sense, obviously, at 7. And then Atlanta is the very interesting spot to me. So anyway, trades, I think 4, 5, 6, all those picks could get moved. I think Tennessee stays at 7. Atlanta at 8, they could just take the best defensive player available, which I think we all expect, maybe Dallas Turner, the edge rusher from Alabama, or maybe they are a trade down spot if a team wants to jump ahead of the Chicago Bears to get a tackle or receiver or whatever. But I think there's a scenario where there's 1 or 0 defensive players in the top 10, which sounds crazy, but I think it's very possible.
Yeah, it is. What are the chances of the Bears and I know this sounds really crazy just because they got another tight end too, but what if Brock Bowers is sitting there? Like, what if Brock Bowers is there? Is it a hard pass, or is there a little bit of thought there?
I mean, I would consider it. I think you could make a case he's the best college tight end we've ever seen. And that's not necessarily as a prospect, but at least just what he did at the college level.
Yeah.
And he's a different cat. I mean, he is a smooth mover for a tight end. He's a pass catching weapon immediately, and he is a bit smaller, but he's been a fine blocker in the SEC. So I would consider it, but I don't think it's really a strong consideration for the Bears. I think if that's how it shakes out, they probably become a trade down team. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're sitting there, and teams at 13-14 to me are very interesting, with the Raiders and the Saints, who both need tackles. And I'll say the Bears, they missed on their receivers. Maybe they don't love the defensive players, or they think they can get one later. If they let one of those teams come up for a tackle, they sit there at 13-14 and then take a Jared Verse or what, Byron Murphy, whatever. I think that's a possible scenario as well.
Just a quick look around the NFC North, because it looks like it could be a very competitive division next season. One of the better divisions if things pan out, obviously, with Caleb Williams. We've already seen the Lions make a ton of improvements the last year. Looks like, do you believe Jordan Love is the guy?
Unfortunately, yes.
I know.
I think the second half of the season, he may have been the best quarterback in the NFL. Or certainly, I'm not saying like he's going forward, he's going to be that. But his production performance from week 9 on was as good as anybody in the league.
Yeah, I know. It's scary. The one thing I kept going back to was when I was comparing through the first 14 weeks. So I went back and looked at Mitchell Trubisky's for those first 14 games for him, or the 14 games in 2018, and like identical almost to what Jordan Love's first 14 games were this last season. So I just have to hope that this next year he has that like Mitch Trubisky drop off for some reason. But the problem with that is Green Bay's defense was not helping Jordan Love last season, and Mitchell had a ton of help from their defense. But in general, the NFC North, what are your thoughts on that and the competitiveness that we'll see next year?
I really do think, like you said, obviously 2 rookie quarterbacks hypothetically, or Sam Darnold in Minnesota, so that could change things. But I think it's a very competitive division. Detroit is going to be a good football team. Like you said, they got better. I love the additions for them they've made this offseason, trading for Carlton Davis, signing DJ Reader away from the Cincinnati Bengals. They made some very good moves. The Packers are the Packers. They're going to be great. We talk about Jordan Love. He also had 2 young tackles, and every single pass catcher he threw to was a rookie or a second-year player. Yeah. So I know it's doomsday, but really, they should be better. And on the defense, too, they had probably the worst safety room in the NFL. You make a splash for Xavier McKinney. So I think the Packers and Lions are going to be playoff teams again, or, that caliber of team. And then I'm hoping the Bears can be a wild card type team, a plucky team. If Caleb Williams can be, look, he's not going to be CJ Stroud. It's just very rare to see that level of play from a rookie, but obviously stepping into a phenomenal situation, probably the best situation a number 1 overall pick has had in a while. I think the Bears should be a 500 team threatening for a wild card spot.
Is Justin Fields going to be starting at all in Pittsburgh this year?
I think we'll get there eventually. I do. I think Russell Wilson, he'll start, if I had to guess, in week 1. And look, that team always finds ways to win games, and he's a better quarterback than Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky, and Nathan Rudolph. So it's an upgrade for them. But I do see a scenario where maybe he's not playing great, and they just sit there and say, why would we not get a look at this kid in Fields, who could be our quarterback for years beyond this? And maybe they pass the torch there midseason.
Yeah, and I know people are going to be like, why are we still talking about Justin? He's gone. But it does matter because it's a 4th or 6th round pick comparing what he ends up playing. So it is going to be a topic this year. We're still going to be talking about Justin Fields a little bit. But Brad, thanks so much for hopping on with me. Sorry about the technical difficulties in the beginning, but I hope you have a good rest of your week.
You too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.